Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along. I put this panel into the program because I thought it would be very interesting to hear from a group of people their perspective on how much has been achieved or not achieved in the last 15 years of responsible tourism. For those of you who are unaware of the history, it's a delight to have a Minister of Tourism from the Western Cape, but also the Minister of Tourism for South Africa with us this afternoon, because the Cape Town Declaration originated in Cape Town at a side event to the World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002. The World Summit was in Johannesburg and the Cape Town Declaration was signed in the same year as a side event. So we're 15 years on, and I'm interested to hear from what I hope is probably a critical panel about how much we have achieved or not achieved. You'll be pleased to know, I think, that we only have one PowerPoint in this panel, and that's from Xavier Font. So Xavier, if you go first, and then we'll go along the panel. Thank you very much.
So it seems to me that tourism and leisure is growing, and we have assumed in the past that when there is less money available, people will travel less, and actually the evidence always shows that when we have less money, people want to escape from their crap lives and they spend money on travel. Okay, so tourism is a way of escaping. Tourism is also the result in the last few years of we can access everywhere, and it's been said in the past, the important thing is no longer whether we can get there, but whether it'll be worthwhile getting there. We've seen, I would say, in the last few years that as a result of this, there's an increase in authenticity and sustainability as a way of compensating for the fact that we live in this kind of McDonald's life and everything looks vanilla flavored and everything is a little bit flat and dull, okay? And the challenge that we also have is that increasingly tourism is much more democratized. So the fact that everybody's becoming a traveler means that everybody becomes both a host and a guest. And there was a time there were very clear differences. People lived in cities and they traveled to tourist destinations, and now they're still, cities are bigger destinations than many of the kind of coastal places we had in the past. And so you find yourself one day being a traveler yourself and another day being traveled to. I think that we have focused on a technological fix in the last 15 years, and I think that we have tried and failed miserably at changing people's behavior. People want more, okay? We focus on this efficiency, therefore, and we'll keep focusing on trying to do more with fewer resources, okay? So it's resource management first and foremost. Climate change has kicked in, of course, in the last 15 years. We didn't talk about it when we first had the Cape Town Declaration. And as a consequence, we're focusing much more on risk preparedness and risk management. We focus on water consumption and linked to water consumption, and the fact that the water growth has, usage of water has changed a lot in the last 15 years, means that that has kicked in a greater usage of energy for desalination and processing wastewater as well. I'm worried about the fact that if we keep focusing on water, waste and energy, the environmental agenda has really not considered enough biodiversity in the last few years, or aspects of the resource management that do not allow us to have eco-efficiencies. And it seems to me that the key question of resource equity and equitable access to resources has been forgotten a little bit. I'm particularly worried about empowerment and what's happened with human resources. I haven't necessarily seen jobs getting better and the quality of jobs getting better for many tourism professionals in the last few years, despite the fact that we keep talking about it a lot more. And eco-labels that we had 15 years ago, and I remember some of those used to be environmental only, and now we call them sustainability, but still the kind of socioeconomic aspects of what we consider sustainability seems to be coming in more slowly. I'm interested in, let's see what happens, if this changes or not. No, it's taking a while. Stakeholder accountability. I think we need a lot more to happen on this. It's grown, but we haven't got enough transparency from my point of view yet. Corporate social reports 15 years ago were very, very basic. They still are, to a certain extent. Global Reporting Initiative has come in the last 15 years. There are higher standards, better standards, and there's a much better understanding now of what would a tour operator have to do, or a cruise line, and so on, to become more sustainable. We need more meaningful labeling of who is sustainable and who isn't, and I don't think we've reached that in the last 15 years yet. And we also need to make sure that some of the solutions that we've got from here onwards are much more scalable. We've got lots and lots of small, cute, boutique examples of good practice, and we've got relatively little understanding of how do we scale those up to do something meaningful with it. In terms of the practices that we've got, I think we've professionalized sustainability. 15 years ago, there were very few people that could have a job where sustainability was in their job title. But at the same time, obviously, one of the interesting things has been that sustainability has become integrated in many other people's jobs across the, the industry. I still find that too much of what we call sustainability in our sector in the last 15 years has been philanthropy, and it's been there from a reputational risk management point of view, and it's been like, I'll do my business and then I'll just do a little bit on the side. And I think we need to change that, and we need to look at much more meaningful product design that happens to be more sustainable. Okay, so sustainable supply chain management has kicked in the last few years, but not as far and not as fast as I wish it would do. And my worry has also been, because not everybody has the resources to be able to be identified as a sustainable company, we now have legitimized inequity. Big companies have the skills and the knowledge to be seen as being sustainable, and there are small companies that will be very sustainable, but they don't have the ability to be seen as such. In terms of marketing, I would finish with that. That's my pet topic. Okay, I think we've gained a better understanding of consumer needs, but we have further to go on this. I think that we have a culture of the me now, okay, and nothing else matters. We've gone from Amazon to Amazon Prime to Amazon Now. My goods will be delivered in my house within 1 hour if I live in London. Okay, everything has to be so much more instantaneous, with a lot of advantages and many disadvantages from a sustainability point of view. I think we have a polarization in consumption of sustainability, and sustainability really is seen as hedonism. Okay, it's just all about making me feel good. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Xavier. John, would you like to go next, please? John Swarbooke from Plymouth University wrote a major textbook on sustainable tourism. I don't know how you feel about that book now, John.
It's all right. No, if I was going to do it again, it would look a lot different to how the first one looked, that's for sure. And it was written maybe, 3 years before the Cape Town Declaration. It would look a whole lot different now, and I think that sets the context for what I want to say in my 5 minutes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here. I do believe that the Cape Town Declaration was an important first step. It was a first step to recognise the importance of responsible tourism in destinations. I think it also has left a legacy of responsible tourism conferences, which Harold has been organising and other colleagues have organised, which have also made sure the message keeps getting out there all the time in different parts of the world. And that has created a network of people who then become the core speakers for events like this as well. There has been some awareness raising, there has been some sharing of experiences, and it's led to some voluntary industry action. And of course, whenever Harold invites me to do these things, he knows that's probably about as much time as I'm going to spend on the positive, and then he's going to expect me to do some of the more critical stuff, so I will do that. So the challenges that I think remain, first of all, is recognising that responsible tourism is a political issue. It's not a management issue, it's not an issue around technical solutions, it's fundamentally a political issue, and people still don't want to seem to recognise that fact. So I trained as a planner, I was a tourism planner for years, I understand tourism management, it's not new. But what amazes me is people think that that management can take place before you've had any political discussion at all. That it isn't about who's going to gain, who's paying here. There's always somebody gaining, there's always somebody paying. That's a political decision that needs to come before any management of tourism actually takes place. I see very little evidence that we've made any progress on that whatsoever. And I listened to some really interesting discussions yesterday where yet again we were talking about what we need is management, what we need is planning. No, what we need is good political decision making, which then underpins good planning and management. Not those things happening in isolation, because believe me, if they happen in isolation, they won't happen. They won't be implemented if there's no political will behind them. I think we've made real progress on some of the environmental issues. We'll all argue not fast enough, I'm sure. We've also, I think, made progress in recognising the importance of the economic benefits of tourism and ensuring that those are distributed as widely as possible. We're still a long way behind in terms of social issues. whether it's accessibility, or whether it's even things like labour issues. I totally agree with what Xavier said before. Tourism employment doesn't look much better now than it did 20 years ago, and it didn't look great 20 years ago. I think we also need to recognise that we've had the focus so far has been that responsible tourism is something that happens in poorer countries. And it's about people from richer countries helping poorer countries to manage their tourism more responsibly, or encouraging citizens from richer countries to behave more responsibly. But those of you familiar with the current debates around over-tourism will know over-tourism at the moment is a European issue. It's been driven from Europe at the moment by European cities. Now I could argue those cities maybe haven't got their priorities right. There are bigger issues in the world perhaps, in other poorer countries. But nevertheless, these are recognising that responsible tourism is relevant everywhere. And instead of travelling to another country to look at their responsible tourism, maybe those of us who are European should stay in Europe and start looking at our own cities and what's happening in our own cities in terms of responsible tourism before we fly to what are often very attractive places to look at somebody else's tourism. If we're going to have a Cape Town declaration again, I think what we'd have to say is it would probably have to only apply to Cape Town, because the one thing I think we've also learned is there is no size that fits all. Every destination is truly different. So although the sharing of experience can be really helpful in helping every location to find its own solutions, there are no solutions that work everywhere, because there are no two destinations that are even vaguely alike in terms of all the complexities that make a destination. Nearly finished now. The other thing that's happened since 2002, of course, is the world has changed dramatically in ways that mean if we were going to keep a Cape Town declaration, we've now got to update it. In fact, we should have been updating it all the time as the world changes, because as a tourism planner I know, you don't make a plan and then keep it the same for years. You have to constantly be evolving and updating it. And look at what's happened in the last 15 years to our business. Water issues have become massive. Not only water shortages, but as we heard this morning, plastic in water. And the issue of plastic in the oceans around the world, which tourism is part of the cause. Not the only cause, but part of the cause, but also suffer, the consequences of that. We look at the fact that terrorism isn't new, but tourist destinations have now become major targets for terrorist groups in the last 15 years more than before. It wasn't new, but it's now absolutely at the top of the agenda for terrorism and so on, tourist destinations. We have migration crises across the world we didn't have on the same scale when we were talking about the 2002 Cape Town Declaration. These are all game changers, I think. But at the same time, you have the rise of social media. So the idea that in the past, if a benevolent industry, a benevolent media got together, they could make things happen. They're not in control anymore. The world is not being controlled in the same way. Consumers are feeling, right or wrongly, more power and less willing to take other people's word for anything. And just to finish off then, there's still a lack of consumer buying from all these things, and that's even without things like Airbnb and the other things, which no matter what you think of them, they have changed the game. I have my own views on them, but they have changed the game in ways we need to recognise. So, where are we? It was a good first step, absolutely. We need to keep having those things in mind that underpin that declaration. We need to recognise that we need to have different approaches in different destinations, I think. We have to recognise, probably lastly, that governments are not going to make this happen. That super-governmental bodies, whether it's the UN, whether the EU, they're not going to make this happen. They were never going to make this happen, but they can help to make it happen, for sure. That's why responsible tourism matters, because it's what we do as individuals, it's what companies do. And I would say for a lot of the tourism companies, they've gone much further than they needed to do. It's really interesting, I think you alluded to this. There was no great pressure on them to do a lot of the things they've actually done. They've done it because a few enlightened companies thought it was the right thing to do, and maybe thought in the future it would bring them benefits. So I salute the companies who've done that, but we've not scratched the surface yet. So my argument would be, loads of improvements since the Cape Town Declaration. That was a really important first step, but the progress is simply too slow. We're just not moving quickly enough. That would be my end. Sorry I ran over a little bit. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much indeed, John. That means we've now heard from two academics. Now we're going to hear from Fran Hughes, who's from the International Tourism Partnership, which represents the world's biggest hotels.
Thank you, and those were very energetic presentations to follow, very passionate. So, well, where was I 15 years ago? Where was I working? I was working at the tour operator explore. And I apologise to the Minister, I apologise to Harold. We had not heard of the Cape Town Declaration. But we had
I'm very surprised by that.
But we had heard of responsible tourism, and it was something that we had at exploring, the way that we put together our tours, put together our product, the way that we ran our tours, the way that we communicated it about, you know, leaving only footsteps and seeing the real culture. It was kind of in the DNA, but it wasn't really in the structure of the way that we worked. But in a way that makes this a lot easier. It's much easier for a company where you've got the whole philosophy is around people and planet, to then realise, okay, well, you know, we need to formalise this, we need to make a structure behind it. That's much easier. You can retrofit those things, and I think it's been harder for other companies who know that they've got to set policies and procedures and codes of conduct and things like that, and then try to sell that to your business partners and your suppliers and so forth. So we have seen that going on. For the last 6 years I've been at the International Tourism Partnership, which is a member organisation of the world's leading hotel groups who come together to collaborate on social and environmental responsibility. And actually we've been going as ITP for 25 years, so since the first Rio Earth Summit, when we realised that the tourism sector needed to come together to take action. And I think even 15 years ago, probably ITP was at the stage where there were discussions. It was great that a sector was coming together, but maybe the focus was more on, well, let's develop guidance, let's develop tools and resources for us to use and to mutually benefit from. But we're at a transition stage now, I think, with the sector. So at least with the hotel sector, I'm speaking within my sphere of knowledge at the moment. But there are 3 things I want to highlight, which I do see as key points which the hotel sector has advanced over the last 15 years. The first is on measurement and reporting. So probably 15 years ago there weren't many companies that reported on their social and environmental activities. Now I think it's pretty much across the board that companies will be publishing, you know, standalone sustainability reports, if not including this into their overall business reporting. And it is that driver of sort of transparency and needing to start measuring and start reporting. And as ITP, we've facilitated some of those ways of measuring. So, for example, the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative, used by over 24,000 hotels worldwide to measure and report on carbon in a consistent way. It's the first step. It's not, you know, it doesn't create impact in itself, but it's the first step you need to take on that journey to taking account of your carbon emissions and so forth. You see, same with water. We have the Hotel Water Measurement Initiative, quite new, 12,000 plus hotels using that now. I think we do need to transition the way that we report on environmental metrics. People, you know, smile and nod and we say, yes, we know we're going to reduce our carbon emissions by 20% by 2025. I don't know what that means, because I don't know what the baseline is, I don't know what the benchmark is, I don't know if that's good, bad, you should be doing better or worse. We've got to move along the debate on that. And again, with, as the panel has said, we need to get much better on social reporting. When we were looking at developing our goals, we're saying, well, what metrics are people using? And it's few, and we're missing so many opportunities. You know, we always say tourism is a force for good. We're really rubbish at actually evidencing that. We've talked ourselves into it for so long, and I think we really need to get a lot cleverer and align measuring and reporting with the Sustainable Development Goals. This is where you demonstrate progress. Second thing, so measure and reporting. Second thing is stakeholder engagement. That has really moved on. Our members used to run for the hills, you know, when we talk about getting in a room with an NGO that's campaigning on human rights or the trade unions. We've done 2 rounds of stakeholder engagement now. We've brought our members together and had some really difficult and challenging conversations. And I think there's a real sort of level of maturity on both sides in that, you know, we realise that we're only going to drive change if we work together. And I see really proactive relationships which are springing up, you know, between non-profit organisations and with our members as well on an individual basis. The third thing is the ambition. The Sustainable Development Goals, I think, has really sort of captured people's imagination. I think the world's moved on with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the advance of the Modern Slavery Act, looking at the movement to science-based targets on carbon. I've seen the level of ambition of our members go from that to that. You know, we don't kick things into the too hard bucket anymore. We say it's not credible for us to look at carbon targets which are not based in science. It's not credible for us not to look at the pressing issues of human rights in the labour supply chain and the construction phase. And I commend the industry for doing that. So whilst we might not have the evidence so much so far, I think we're at this really tipping point, a transition point. And I have to promote our ITB goals in that our members are supporting our goals in 4 areas: to embrace science-based targets, to embed water stewardship across the sector, on human rights, to address human rights issues in the labour supply chain and the construction phase, and on youth employment to collectively impact over 1 million young people. So we really have moved from that to sort of, let's say, philanthropy and measuring on incremental to what can be transformative change. And I just say, watch this space.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I think Alan will add where I have fallen short, but I'm coming from South Africa where pre-1994 we welcomed about 3 million visitors into the country. And in 2015 we welcomed and we clocked 10 million visitors into the country. It's a sector that is contributing about 9% into the GDP. And the latest in 2016, we contributed in terms of jobs to about 700,000 direct jobs. Now, with the economic downturn, this is one of the sectors that is looked up to create the much needed jobs and also to create revenue that gets into the purse of the country. And moving in between the years pre-1994 up to now, we had to come up with a strategy for growing tourism, but we are very proud that we set the pace from the Cape Town Declaration that has been keeping us to ensure that in whatever we do is not about numbers and money, but it's also about the people. The whole government's agenda is about inclusive growth, with decent jobs that you have to create, and to ensure that, one, with inclusive growth, people are able to participate, they are able to have a fair share in what is happening. So we're coming from there because, one, as part of that, in terms of the interventions in growing tourism, we developed a strategy. With that strategy, it gave a sense, I think it was from the indication earlier on, of the role of government as taking the lead to ensure that we make it easy for tourism to happen, with private sector being the drivers and with community participation. That has been what has been driving us, the partnership that we have created with, as government, with private sector and community. So in all our strategy from the onset, it became responsible in that it has to take into consideration each and every one of these critical partners as we bring them. So in the previous years, it may not be fully 15 years, but in the years and the strategy that we developed, that has been masterminded by all of these in their partnership, it has created for us a situation where we are looking into, if you have this industry that is drivers, how do you make sure people participate? We looked into various areas. We looked into how they can also contribute to the growth of the communities within where their establishments are. So that the fact now, as we are looking into tourism, offering this significant opportunities and a tool for economic growth, working with the sector, because we are looking into how we can develop further products, because developing further products indicates that we can keep tourists more into the country. If you look into the South African stand today, you have small and medium enterprises that also are bringing into a big platform like this. So we have incentive program, enterprise development program, we have programs of skills that are designed to develop the products and give market access, which is where we think there is the growing benefit of our communities and participation of our communities, and ensuring that their establishments are able to welcome the kind of tourists that would come from international but also domestic tourists. Our strategy lately, which is 5 in 5, where we're looking into the next 5 years of growing further 5 million tourists, 4 million are international, 1 million is domestic. Looking at my badge that I'm wearing, we have a big campaign that is running to each and every one of the communities where we're promoting rural tourism, township tourism, destination development broadly. We are encouraging each and every South African to participate. The one who is sweeping the street, the one who is in a supermarket, the one who is in a restaurant, to understand the value and value tourism and also make a contribution, which is also adding to the fact that we want South Africa to be a safe destination, both for tourists and for South Africans, because we would not just be happy to have something that is tailor-made for tourists. We want something that make the whole country to be a safe destination. We have young people who are trained as food safety assurers, because we pride ourselves, we are a culturally diverse country. We want to make sure you are able to taste into everything that makes who we are. Because additional from our safaris, where we practice a lot of conservation, we have concessions that make communities participate at ownership, at the kind of local economic development. But our pride also goes to say, when a tourist visits our place, they can see and can be taught by people who have awareness of what is happening, who can show that preservation, because tourism and environment in South Africa are very critical, are some of the major drivers of our economic development.
Good day, everybody. I'm going to start off by saying that there's one thing we must never do is waste a good crisis. And I think we are driving responsible tourism because our planet is in crisis, right? But we don't put plans to that crisis. We don't, and I really say this, you know, the Cape Town Accord, 15 years on, what are those plans that we really put in place? We sign an agreement, measurements, the political will, what you've heard here today, what are those plans that we actually put in place, measure them rigorously, and see, are we actually winning this battle? And what I'm going to talk to you about is the couple of crises that we've got at the moment in the southern tip of Africa, and how those crises, which are crises within the bigger climate change and planet problem we've got, the discussions I heard today around over-tourism, etc. The only reason we in South Africa don't suffer from this over-tourism is long-haul destination. We've got great pricing, and I promise we would probably be in exactly the same position that we're seeing here in Europe if it wasn't for such a long haul. But the crisis that we are sitting with, and if I have a look at that Cape Town Accord, and what we agreed to look at was energy, water, waste, it was procurement, it was economic development, skills, inclusive economy, and it was social development. And if I have a look at all of those, I can't stand here proudly today saying to you, this was the plan that was put in place on each of those topics, and this is where we're measuring ourselves, and this is where we find ourselves today. The only ones that I can really give you some measurements are on energy, first of all. Why? Because I wasn't around in 2002 when we signed this accord, but I came into government in 2009, and when I came into government in our country, we had an energy crisis. We had one energy supplier, and we didn't have enough energy for growth, and we had a crisis. We were going into blackouts with our energy systems, and it was a major problem. And so what we did was we set about changing that. And without going into a lot of detail, in Cape Town and in the Western Cape, in actual fact, it was two energy suppliers. It was a national energy supplier, and a local authority had a small hydroelectric plant. But today, We've got more than 3,000 independent power producers putting power into the grid, sustainable energy. Robben Island is off the grid, producing its own power, not using diesel power generators. The V&A waterfront, 24 million visitors a year. They've got sufficient solar energy on the roofs of all of those buildings in the waterfront to provide sufficient energy for their own needs and still put extra energy into the system. So crisis within crisis, and we managed to find some really, really good outcomes. If I look at the waste economy, we set up an organization called Green Cape, which was to look at the whole green economy, focused on energy, but a lot of great work happening, especially around food waste and really some amazing stuff. We set up a program called 110% Green, started signing up companies to say they are going to pledge to change their bottom line and look at the green economy. And in actual fact, water wasn't taken into account in this space, but South Africa got voted by Moody's in November last year as the fastest growing green economy in the world. And that was primarily driven on the energy crisis that we had, and we are now rolling that out into some other areas. The third area, or perhaps the fourth area I'll talk about, I'll go back to the third one, which is water. The fourth one is skills, and I can say today that we've got a really, really focused skills program, a lot of it into the tourism sector. But you know, we didn't put that skills program in place because of the signing the accord. We put it in place because in South Africa we've got a high unemployment rate, but it does align, and I can stand here today and give you some report on it, but we've really got some focused skills programs, making sure that we're upskilling people specifically linked to tourism, from guiding all the way down to chefs, to blockmen, to anybody involved in making sure that we're delivering a better tourism environment. But last of all is water. And at the moment in Cape Town, we are sitting in a more than 120-year drought. We have, when you look at some of the media, you'll see that we've even got a day zero when we will run out of water. And it is scheduled, or it could happen this coming holiday season. But of course, this now has really got us to react. We now have business plans in place. I can tell you now that when internal domestic flights fly to Cape Town, they do not upload water in Cape Town. In actual fact, they offload water in Cape Town so we can build up a water reserve. I can tell you that we've got a major growth spurt at the moment. Our international arrivals are growing at 27% at the moment, and domestic tourism in Cape Town is growing at 16% at the moment. What I can tell you is the new hotels coming online are measuring how much water they are using. They can tell you within, I think it's within an hour, on any hotel in the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape where there is a leak. They measure now litres per client. They have reduced their water savings by 30%, 40% and 50% depending on which hotel group it is, and they have really got very, very proactive, and that comes to the measurement. If you're not measuring, how on earth can you manage? And then of course I want to just say one or two words about Airbnb, because they have also become amazing, it's an amazing growth engine in Cape Town at the moment. In November last year, Airbnb had 15,000 properties in Cape Town. In March, they'd gone to 17,000, and we've just had a workshop with digital nomads and looking at enabling this new economy. And we had some policy makers out from Silicon Valley, and we'd gone to 17,800 Airbnb properties. But the one nice thing about that platform is you can put a water message directly into every one of those customers on their way there. You can make sure, and they've pledged that we will make sure that we reduce those water consumption numbers. So I think, and I know I'm probably overgone my 5 minutes, but if I can just say a last thing, and that is, if we sign these accords, we must make sure we attach proper business plans to them, and we set proper measurements. We've got to set those measurements. So we've set ourselves a target through Green Cape on saying, from a water point of view that's driven it, how do we get to the best practice in the world on litres per bed night in the hotel industry, or even litres per bed night in the medical industry, or what are your water usages, or what's your kilowatt hour usage? And so we put these measurements in place that we actually start developing world best practice on a blue drop system or some measurement system that is a globally, not just a few issues on measurement, but let's put a matrix together. We work out who has the best practice in the world, and we all start setting ourselves a target to at least meet that benchmark within the next few years. And you put that kind of competition in place, and then how do we link that to our reward system and link it to our booking systems and link it to the brand of the region that you're going to visit? Because if we link it to all of those, we will succeed in taking this overall big crisis of an environment that is really, really under pressure, and we will really start to succeed to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. There's time for one or two questions at most. I hope you've enjoyed those presentations. They're very stimulatingly different. But who has a question?
Hello. I was wondering, you were mentioning reporting and benchmarks and all these sorts of things. And I was wondering, what do you think is the role of certifications within sustainable tourism?
The role of?
Xavier, you're not allowed to answer the question. Okay. Would either of you like to answer? I mean, how much do you value certification from a destination management perspective?
You want to come in?
Well, I think if you're going to eventually reach a benchmarking exercise, then surely certification must play a role in getting to that space. But what's the disruption to certification? How are we going to make it accessible, massive across from a demand point of view? That certification is something that is maybe given to all those techie companies on the other side in the corner there that gets sold. How do we actually get that certification measurement as a global benchmark?
Alan, you were obviously at the session yesterday, you obviously were, when I was trying to make the case for saying that there ought to be a lot more transparency about what hotels have actually really achieved. And I think, Fran, you were close to saying that, although you didn't. And it's been a common theme about this question of transparency and companies and destinations talking about what's actually happening rather than just ideas.
I think it's a matter of having the right context. I think what we see at the moment is, there is a lot of reporting on what companies are doing, but it lacks the context. So the issue came up yesterday about benchmarking and saying, well, we need to be more transparent about what good looks like. And this is where it sounds very exciting to think that, we can really understand, what does good look like in that particular context? Where are we addressing the local needs? And so I think that's where we need to get much cleverer.
If you take Cape Town as an example of a place in South Africa which has got serious water issues and they're not going to go away, they're only going to get worse. I would really like, when I come to Cape Town, to be able to choose the hotel which has done most to reduce its water consumption. But I can't do that because the information is not available. And I think that's the next big disruptor, is when the hotels actually have to face that. Alan.
When are you coming again? No, when are you coming again? Oh, I'll be there in April. In April. So between now and April, I have to get it together. Okay.